Hello everyone. Today we're going to have a look at the last subtopic of Theme 9, Kings and Chronicles, the Mughal court, circa 16th to 17th centuries. In the last lesson, we were having a look at the Ibadat Khana and the ideas of Akbar regarding religion. Today we're going to have a look at in general about what the empire was functioning like as far as talks of spirituality are concerned, as far as ideas of an enlightened rule are concerned, and what their few beliefs were. And also how they portrayed themselves to their subjects and tried to be popular among them. The power of the Mughal kings came directly from God. This should not be anything new to hear because we also studied something similar in Form 11 where, remember, the first and second estate, the clergy and nobility in Europe worked closely together, and a lot of times the nobility or the king required the close association of the church for legitimization. And even when we had a look at ancient India, a lot of rulers call themselves Dev Putra and give themselves all kinds of titles so that it could be stated that they had the divine right to rule. They gave a lot of land grants, a lot of gifts to priests so that priests could tell the people that God has chosen the monarch and they should thus obey the monarch. So a similar idea for Mughals also. It's believed that their power came directly from gods. One of the legends narrated was that of the Mughal queen Alanka, who was impregnated by a ray of sunshine while resting in her tent. The offspring she bore carried this divine light and passed it on from generation to generation. Now, the thing is, if you tell the people that God has appointed you to rule, you have to have stories to support it. We've seen such stories in Mahabharata also. Gods coming down, gods and certain rulers being avatars of certain gods, and this should, again, something not too surprising. So it's believed that one Mongol queen, Alanka, was impregnated by a ray of sunshine or like sun god, and in fact when she gave birth there was this light in the child, and all the Mughal rulers then carried this light in them. And this light is something that people look up to and people are blinded by it at the same time because they do not have the courage to challenge it because it's God's light. So something like that. Abul Fazl is, if you remember, the court writer of Akbar and the person who wrote Akbarnama. Abul Fazl placed the Mughal kingship as the highest station in the hierarchy of objects receiving light emanating from God, and this light was called Far-e-Izadi, which was actually inspired by the idea of a Sufi saint, Shihabuddin Suhrawardi. So there is this light emanating from God, and the Mughals are the first to receive it. If you ask me who was the last, probably someone who was most neglected in society, someone very evil, poverty, so on and so forth, certain things, So the good things would be right in front, and the best thing and the most divine thing was Mughal kingship. So the Mughal kingship received all the light of God, or the first to receive the light of God. Paintings transmitted similar ideas, having a lasting impression in the minds of the viewers. We've seen paintings earlier where emperors have been depicted with a halo. They've also been seen surrounded by angels helping them. So such ideas, such paintings left a lasting impression on the minds of people, especially because a lot of people could not really read. So if I write a book and then I write about this divine light of king in that book, a lot of people would not want to read it. A lot of people may not be able to read, so they will never know. But paintings is something everyone can see and understand. So paintings went a very, very long way. Mughal artists from 17th century onwards began to portray the emperors with a halo, which they saw on European paintings of Christ and the Virgin Mary to symbolize the light of God. So now Mughal artists start taking ideas from the tradition of Europe, where Christ and Virgin Mary were shown as to symbolize the light of God, and they started showing their own Mughal emperors in the same way. Mughal chronicles depict, I'll just show you a painting with the halo. Yeah, we saw a similar thing when we were having a look at paintings. See, that's Akbar in the picture, and the bigger one is his son, Jahangir. So they've got a halo around their heads, both of them, Akbar and Jahangir. First, have a look at this, Jahangir and the chain of justice. See, Angel's getting a crown. He has a halo around his head. He's shooting at something dark and evil and dirty, which is poverty. One angel is also helping him with the arrows. Right? So this is portraying, and this idea of halo came from Christ and Virgin Mary, Christianity. Below, have a look at another little painting here. That's below Jahangir's figure. See, you notice a lamb and you notice a lion. Now, ideally, you do not see a lion sitting so peacefully and comfortably with a lamb or a goat. Or that could also be a cow sometimes. But why has it been painting like this in a painting? So it's going to be portrayed that the Mughal emperors are like the lion, and no matter who their subjects are, they are going to keep them safe. They are not going to hurt them. So in this manner, paintings will go a long way. Point number 6. Mughal chronicles depict the empire as being diverse and consisting of various ethnic communities like Hindus, Jains, Zoroastrians, these would be Iranians, and Muslims. The emperor stood above them all and ensured that justice and peace prevailed. In paintings, symbols for peace and justice were shown as a cow, lamb, and a lion peacefully together, what I just showed you a little while back. Abul Fazal described Sulh-e-Kul. Please remember this. Sulh-e-Kul means absolute peace. This was the cornerstone of enlightened rule, where there would be absolute peace. This idea was propagated by Akbar. Some people also thought the ulama, in fact, they did not like Akbar because he established the Ibadat Khana where people of all religions discussed and he listened to them, very interested. And B, the ulama, when Akbar establishes something like Sulh-e-Kul, which is absolute peace, and he tries to promote this as a different sort of ideology, spiritual ideology altogether. Some ulama people said that Akbar is probably trying to establish a whole new religion altogether, and they were absolutely against him. In Sulh-e-Kul, all religions and school of thought had freedom of expression, but on condition that they did not undermine the authority of the state or fight amongst themselves. So this is the new idea of Akbar, this absolute peace. In Sulh-e-Kul, everyone can stay peacefully, everyone can have their own ideas, but it's different from religions, and yes, Sulh-e-Kul is a spiritual idea because it allows other ideas to exist as long as they exist peacefully. Rajputs, Iranis or Iranians, Turanis, Afghans, Deccanis were all given positions and awards purely on the basis of their service and loyalty to the king. So they had to show merit and loyalty to the king, and that's how they were promoted, not on the basis of religion. Akbar also abolished the tax on pilgrimage as well as the protection tax, jizya. The pilgrimage tax was abolished in 1563, and the protection tax, jizya, which had to be paid by all non-Muslims, was abolished by Akbar in 1564. as the two were based on religious discrimination. Abul Fazl defined sovereignty as a social contract, where he said that the emperor protected four essence of his subjects, which were life, Jan, property, Mal or Mal, honor, Namus, and faith, Deen. In return, the emperor demanded obedience and a share of resources. That gets us to an end of theme 9. Thank you.